Okay, so the reason I'm flipping just quickly is because we're going to study Hosea 3, and we're going to study it in both hours. So the second hour will be much more applicational, much more like a sermon. This will be much more detail, like a kind of Sunday school class. So I thought it would be better to get the details up front because most people aren't familiar with Hosea. So those of you who are here, have been here. This will be you know this, but for those that are new, we've been studying the covenants, the biblical covenants, every Sunday during Sunday school class. So we are kind of finished that. We got to the very last one, the new covenant, and Frank's got one more lesson on that. There's what we've covered so far. So we've covered those 6 covenants, and just as a briefer, remember that it's an agreement, like a contract, an agreement, particularly between God and His people, where He makes promises to them, and where they have requirements laid on them as part of the relationship. Now, I want to just go ahead and throw out there that I'm going to try to solve one thing this morning, and one thing only. I'm going to talk about one thing and one thing only this morning. And if you recall, last time Frank was talking about, hey, what's the state of the new covenant right now? Right? Because on the one hand, Jesus said in Luke, this is the blood of my new covenant shed. Right? So sure sounds like the new covenant is being cut, or the new covenant is being ratified or inaugurated. On the other hand, the new covenant was made with who? Do y'all remember? Israel, right? Jeremiah 31. So it was made with Israel and Judah. So all the things promised in the new covenant, does anybody remember what those were? Some of the promises of the new covenant? New heart, that's right. What else? Put His law in their heart. They won't need a teacher. Everyone will know the Lord. They'll live in peace and safety. They'll have prosperity in their land. Like none of that's true if you look, right? So how do those two things go together? How does it that on the one hand, Jesus said this blood is the blood of the new covenant, and on the other hand, it sure doesn't look like the new covenant has been cut with Israel because they're not experiencing any of those benefits, even though they were the ones the new covenant was made with. So if you remember what Pastor Frank talked about, there are two kind of ends of a spectrum in solving that problem, or in talking about that problem. On the one side, some folks would say, well, the new covenant has not started at all. Okay, either there's 2 covenants and the church gets one, and Israel's going to get another one in the future, or the church is, even though the church looks like they're getting a lot of the benefits of the new covenant, because we have the Spirit in us, we have the law in our heart, and all those things, even though it looks like it, we're really not getting the new covenant at all. So that's one end of the spectrum. The new covenant is still future. And that's a very, what's called classical dispensational position. On the other hand, there's more of a covenantal position, which says, yep, the new covenant is fully in force, and Israel has been replaced by the church, and the church is getting all the benefits of the new covenant. And the land, and the promises around the land and things like that, they're more spiritual in nature and not physical. All the safety from wild beasts and things like that, they're going to be interpreted spiritually. Those are the kind of 2 ends of the spectrum. And if you recall, what Frank was saying was, what our church believes is the new covenant has been inaugurated, okay, but in some sense it's not fulfilled yet. So it's been inaugurated through Jesus' death, but it's not fulfilled yet because Israel and Judah haven't reaped the benefits of the new covenant yet. Okay, that's what we talked about. And Frank's got one more week where he's going to, if you remember, he's even reading a book this week to help him better explain that. But we have one more week of the new covenant where we're going to talk about that. So my purpose today, sole purpose for the Sunday school hour, is to give a picture that the Old Testament gives, that Hosea gives to help explain that. To help explain how the covenant could have been inaugurated or started, but not be in full force with Israel. Alright, so that's the sole purpose. Kind of a dry purpose, but we'll have a real applicational and something that will really be relevant to our lives second hour. Okay, so name to mention in the Old Testament, the New Covenant is Jeremiah 31, and that's true. But there are many, and I'll just pop up here, many other references to the New Covenant, even if not explicitly said the New Covenant, in the Old Testament. It's mostly in the latter prophets, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, and the 12. So there's a bunch of references. You can tell they're all talking about the New Covenant, because even though they don't have the word New Covenant, they have the same features, whether it's a new spirit or a new heart or everlasting covenant, where there's going to be safety from wild animals or safety from enemies. All those things are David, the restoration of David. All those things are found in all these passages about the new covenant. Okay, so Hosea is one of those latter prophets that also talks about the new covenant. So So I just put a large block of Hosea 2 here. I'm going to read that because we're actually going to focus on Hosea 3, but I want to go ahead and read Hosea 2. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to skip on Hosea 2 for right now, but you can see that he talks about a covenant as well, and he talks about safety from beasts of the field. He talks about betrothing them to himself. He talks about abundance of the earth, all the things that other prophets use to talk about the new covenant. So we know Hosea is talking about this new covenant as well. But what I'm going to do is, just to prepare us for this hour and the next, I'm going to read Hosea 1 and 3. So if you guys, I know a lot of you are familiar with the story, but some of the kids may not be, and some of us may not have read it in a long time. So let's read together Hosea 1, and then I'll do a couple verses of 2, and then we'll read 3. It's really short, so we can get through it real fast. Hosea 1. The word of Yahweh which came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, during the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When Yahweh first spoke through Hosea, Yahweh said to Hosea, "Go take to yourself a wife of harlotry, and have children of harlotry, for the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking Yahweh." So Hosea went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And Yahweh said to him, "Name him Jezreel for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it will come about on that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." Then she conceived again and gave birth to a daughter, and Yahweh said to him, "Name her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel, that I should ever forgive them. But I will have compassion on the house of Judah, and deliver them by Yahweh their God, and will not deliver them by bow, sword, battle, horsemen, or horses." When she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son, and Yahweh said, "Name him Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it will come about that in the place where it is said to them, 'You are not my people,' it will be said to them, 'You are sons of the living God.' And the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel will be gathered together, and they will appoint for themselves one leader, and they will go up from the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel." So just a real quick summary. Hosea's got this, he's been asked to picture something through his relationship with this woman, Gomer, and he's picturing the unfaithfulness of Israel. There's 3 kids born, and those kids have names which predict something that's going to happen to Israel. Okay, we'll talk about what those are in just a second. Okay, let's keep going. 2. We're just going to, we'll just read the first couple verses and then finish with chapter 3. "Say to your brothers, Ami, and to your sisters, Ruhamah, contend with your mother, contend, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. And let her put away her harlotry from her face, and her adultery from between her breasts." So there seems to be some sort of a separation now. Okay, we've got the people. Now there's a little bit of a separation between Gomer and Hosea themselves. Now flip to 3. This is sometime later. "Then Yahweh said to me," to Hosea, "Go again, love a woman who is loved by her husband," is what my translation says. We'll talk about that. But loved by another, really. And I think that's probably what some of your translations say. "Go again, love a woman who is loved by another man, yet an adulteress, even as Yahweh loves the sons of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love raisin cakes. So I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a half of barley. Then I said to her, 'You shall stay with me for many days. You shall not play the harlot, nor shall you have a man. So I will also be toward you. For the sons of Israel will remain for many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar, and without ephod or household idols. Afterward the sons of Israel will return and seek Yahweh their God and David their king, and they will come trembling to Yahweh and to his goodness in the last days.'" So again, 3 kids born, all their names predict something that's going to come, mostly judgment, and there's a separation between Hosea and Gomer. Now sometime later God says, "Go back, love Gomer again." He goes, he pays some price, he brings her back, and then she has to wait for some many days, for some period of time, when later there's a restoration. Okay, so that's the gist of it. Okay, and that's what we're going to, again, the purpose of this first hour is how does that serve as a picture for how the new covenant has been inaugurated, but it's not fully enforced yet. Okay? All right, so really quick, before, this is going to be kind of a dry hour, so I want to have a little bit of fun. I just want to share with you how I even got started studying Hosea 3. This is from 15 years ago in seminary out in California. Okay, and this was preaching class. And I had no background in public speaking or preaching, and so this was the first time I had such a class as this. And so you'll see we had to, the very beginning of the semester, we had to give 3 sermons. The first was on an Old Testament narrative, the second was on Old Testament poetry, and the third was on Old Testament prophecy. We had 30 minutes to give it, and this would have been the first time I stood up ever and preached before somebody. So my narrative, I chose Ruth, and it was horrible. I mean, I'm sure it's not much better now, but it was horrible then for sure. And the teacher on the whiteboard, and he drew a picture of just a stick figure of this guy behind a pulpit because he was trying to really make the point of how boring I was. And so he said, look, all we have to do to complete the picture is just draw a little thing behind you, and then it looks like a casket, which is about how interesting that was. So, anyway, I mean, he was a really nice man, but he was really trying to make a point that I need to spice it up a little bit. So, anyways, I've even put some little animation here, but that's as fun as it will get. But so the next one, I thought, okay, I really need to work on this. It was poetry, so I picked a psalm, but it was really stupid of me. I picked Psalm 107. It was like 45 verses. You could barely read the thing in 30 minutes, much less work on my delivery style. So it went really bad as well. So I thought, okay, when I get to prophecy, I'm going to find the shortest prophecy I can find. I'm just going to look the Old Testament, find the shortest prophecy, and that's how I came upon Hosea 3, old chapters, 5 verses. And ended up preaching that and working on it, and then ended up staying for an advanced degree for THM, and I had to find something to write about, so I picked Hosea 3. So anyways, that just gives you a little bit of the background. The title of that paper that I ended up writing for my thesis was called The Days of Israel for that advanced degree. And the question that I tried to answer was, when are these many days of Israel? He said the sons of Israel are going to do many days without king or prince, without ephod or sacred pillar. And then in the last days, they'll return to the Lord. So when are those in time? When are the many days? When are the last days? And I'm going to just throw up there this. Again, I'm trying not to get off the beaten track, which is how do we understand a picture of the new covenant. But this will help us at least to understand Hosea 1, because it's Hosea 1, as you remember, had 3 kids, and they represented things. So this will help us kind of get introduced to the book. The first one was named Jezreel, and Jezreel was a battle that happened. So Hosea was preaching around 760 BC. Jezreel was a battle that happened in 733 BC, where Assyria defeated the northern kingdom of Israel and really weakened them. So that's what that first child predicted. The second was Lo Ruhamah, which means no mercy. And he said, I'm not going to have compassion on the house of Israel anymore. I'm going to quit having compassion on them. And that's when Assyria finally took the northern kingdom to exile. But he said, I will have compassion on the house of Judah. And if you remember, y'all may not remember the story, but from Sunday school, when Sennacherib from Assyria came and surrounded Judah, and there were 185,000 soldiers, and an angel came and defeated them in one night, remember, and delivered Judah. Because Hezekiah was the king, and he prayed to God and asked for help. That was in 701. And then he says the third child was named Lo Ami, you're not my people, and that's when he just made an end with his covenant with Israel, as it were. He just quit protecting them, he had no more compassion on them, and that's when Babylon in 586 took the whole nation away. And they were no longer a nation, as it were, with their own land. They were fully in exile. So the next thing that comes is he's told to go and restore his relationship by means of a purchase. Okay, so the purpose of my thesis at the time was to show what is that purchase. We're going to talk about that in just a second, what that is, and when the last days are. Okay. All right, so those are the things that are symbolized in chapter 1. We're going to get into chapter 3 now, and we're going to try to understand chapter 3 together. And then this we'll walk through the first 3 verses in some detail. We'll quickly do the last 2 verses, and then we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes on this picture that comes out of this and how it helps us understand how a new covenant could be inaugurated but not in full force yet. Okay, so Hosea 3. Okay, Yahweh said to me, "Go again, love a woman who is loved by her husband." So it's Gomer. It's clearly Gomer. Go love Gomer again. It's this woman who's loved by another man. She's an adulteress. She's not faithful to Hosea, but Hosea is commanded to love her. And the reason he's commanded to do that is because that's how God loves Israel. That's how God loves Israel. Even though they are worshiping idols, even though they are seeking other gods, God still loves them. Okay, so love is the clear theme. It's 4 times in one verse. You can see later, John is called the book of love in the New Testament. Hosea is like the prophet of love in the Old Testament. There are a lot of references to how much God loves Israel despite what they're doing. And I just threw one up here. This is God kind of struggling with needing to discipline them, but loving them. How can I give you up, O Ephraim, which is another name for Israel? How can I surrender you, O Israel? My heart is turned over within me. All my compassions are kindled. So God has this rich love for Israel, and it's a real struggle, as it were, to punish them as they deserve, to discipline them, despite how much He loves them. Okay, I already talked about how the ESV, which again I know a lot of you have, talks about love by another man. So this is the sons of Israel here, includes both Israel and Judah. So this is the picture. There's been a separation between Hosea and Gomer. Hosea is told to go back, love this woman, because that's how God loves Israel. So easy enough. All right, Hosea 3:2. So he bought her. This is where it starts to get hard. So he bought her for 15 shekels. I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a half of barley. Now the next 2 verses are really hard to understand, really hard to interpret. So there's a lot of different views on them. I just threw this up here as an example. The word for bought, Hebrew grammarians have a really hard time even understanding how that word works. It's not pointed. You see little dots in the word. It's not pointed in a way that they would even expect. So people aren't sure what the word necessarily is. Okay, but we think the best guess is that it's bought. There's some sort of purchase, and that makes sense for 2 reasons. One, he talks about the purchase price. He gives silver and barley. And 2, as we'll see, there was the corresponding thing that God did for Israel is also a purchase that cost something. So we think it's bought, but still, what's the point? What did he buy? Why is there food and silver? Even the word a leket of barley. I don't know what your translations say. Mine says a homer and a half. Like we're not sure what that word is. The Greek version of the Old Testament, the LXX, has wine instead of barley. So again, it's just a lot of uncertainty around here. We don't know to whom these were given. Okay, so this is a long quote. I'm not going to read it. It's just essentially saying it's really difficult to know. Like some people say, hey, the cost was really high. Some people say, no, it's barley. The cost was really low. Some people say she's being bought from a slave market. Some people are saying it's a price that's paid for their renewal together. It's paid maybe to her dad or to the adulterous man that she's with. There's no clear picture on who this money is paid to. Now, I want to suggest a parallel that's in Ruth. You guys will remember this story, and I think this will help us to understand what is pictured here the best we can. So you remember in Ruth, where Ruth has come back, and she is trying to get back into Jerusalem. Her and Naomi have come back. They're trying to make ends meet as they're back without husbands, without any men to support them and work in that day and age. And she goes to Boaz, if you will recall, and lays down next to him in the evening. And then he wakes up, he sees her there, right? And she says, hey, will you take care of me? Will you allow me to be yours and you care for us? You're a redeemer. And he says, yes, hey, I do want to do this. And he gives her, if you recall, a bunch of barley, right? And she takes it home and goes back. So it's very similar to what we're reading in Hosea. Just click through here. And then even Naomi, when she gets back, she says, just wait and see what happens. That's what we have here as well. After this purchase, remember, she has to remain with him for many days. She has to wait. So there's a lot of parallels between the 2 stories. All right. There's one other thing that I don't have time to develop. If you want to read my thesis, Nobody has ever done it. I think I'm the only person in my 2 advisors who's ever done it. People start and try, but it's really, nobody's ever finished. There's a lot of parallels between Hosea 2 and Hosea 3. And in Hosea 2, it talks about betrothal. You remember when I put that over there? It was talking about this idea of a bridal price or a gift that is and we'll talk about that in the end. That's going to end up being the picture that I suggest is what explains the new covenant, is that of a betrothal. But there's a lot in here that makes me, you'll hear a lot of really good sermons where Hosea is on the slave market, or Gomer's on the slave market, and she gets bought back. I don't actually think that's what's going on here. I think it's more of a betrothal. It's more of he is going back to her to love her again, and that's what you did in those days. When you had a woman that you were going to marry, you gave a mohar, a bridal price, to their family. Okay? And so that's what's happening here, I believe. So really, details, again. Sorry about that. This is just another quote. I'll read it because, again, this is going to be the main point of what we're talking about, is this picture of a betrothal. Boaz, this is talking about the situation with Boaz and Ruth. Boaz may have sent this gift to Naomi as a sign of good faith, his determination to carry through with his promise to try to gain the right to Ruth. And if he could not, to see that the primary kinsman redeemer would marry her. In fact, since Naomi was Ruth's legal guardian, he may even have intended the grain as a down payment of the mohar, the bridal price at the time of betrothal. The mohar was given by the groom at the time of betrothal, not as a purchase price. Women were not commodities to be bought and sold. You'll read that sometimes if people felt that way. But really, it was a pledge of good faith to prepare for the wedding and for the good behavior of the groom toward the bride in the meantime. Naomi's response in verse 18 indicates this is how she accepted it. Okay, so in the case of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, the grain was like a gift. It was like to Naomi of, hey, I'm going to take you under my wing. I'm going to care for you. And that's what I think is going on in the case of Hosea and Gomer. Certainly, in any other marriage or any other time when you would go in those days and you would go to pursue a woman, that's the gift that would be given. So I think that's what's happening in Hosea 3. And I mentioned at the very bottom, for those who can see it, I realize it's really low, that there's parallels between Hosea 2 and Hosea 3. And Hosea 2 talks about the betrothal. God is going to... The beginning of Hosea 2 is, hey, I'm going to judge you, Israel, just like those kids, Jezreel, Lo-Ruhamah, and Lo-Ami, just like they predicted, I'm going to judge you. And at the end of Hosea 2 says, I'm going to come back, though. I'm going to woo you back, and I'm going to betroth you again to me in righteousness. That's the new covenant promise. And then Hosea 3 comes in with a picture and shows that through Hosea and Gomer. Hosea 3:3. This is a really hard verse to understand. I said to her, you must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to another man. So will I also be to you. So there's 4 things in here. Okay? You have to dwell with me for many days. You shall not play the whore. That's the second. You shall not belong to another man. So I will also be to you. 4 things. Okay? And there's Hebrew accentuation on the verse. It tells you the first 3 go together, and the last one comes. The first 2 are reasonably clear. You have to stay with me many days. She's having to wait for something. She's going to live in his home for many days. But she can't go off with other men like she was wont to do. That was the point. That's the kind of woman she was. She can't do that. You have to stay in my house, wait. Can't go off to other men. And then what's the 3rd and 4th say? Is the question. All right. So I don't know why it's beeping and not going forward. Okay. So the second. In the NIV, it says you can't be intimate with any man. That's how it's translated. I don't know if anybody has the NIV for the 3rd one. So really, the Hebrew is about marriage. It's about something related to marriage. It's the common way that it talks about marriage, belonging to a man. Is how the literal translation is in the Hebrew, and that's what's here. So it's something about marriage. Okay? I think a lot of... yeah, you may need to. The one I prefer, the New American Standard, I don't like here either. It says you may not belong to another man, but the Hebrew just says you may not belong to a man. You may not be married, is essentially what it says. So she can't commit adultery. She can't play the harlot. She can't play the whore. She also can't be. She's not fully married. She doesn't belong to Hosea. She doesn't belong to any man. Okay, that's what it says, whatever that means. Um, I'm back. So let me just read this. Okay, so what is this? What is Hosea doing? What did God tell him to do? And what is Hosea doing? It says, it's best to consider the second and third parts of Hosea's speech as expletive of the first. So in other words, she's got to stay there for many days, and now we're going to explain what it's going to be like while she's there for many days. Gomer can't belong to any man while she waits is indeed odd. And it's unexpected after he's gone to buy her back. However, this is what Hosea chooses to do. He makes it possible for Gomer and him to be fully restored by supplying the items listed in 3:2, but still their marriage is not immediately restored. Gomer must wait for him. Okay, so he went, he paid the price, she came, but for whatever reason, they're not fully together. She's not allowed to be with other men, and she's not fully his at this point. So that's, for whatever reason that's done, and we'll talk about that in just a second, that's what it says. And then lastly, I will also be to you, it's just two little Hebrew words, really hard to understand what's going on there. I think the best translation is then, indeed, I will be yours. So what he's saying is, you're going to come, you're going to wait many days, you can't be with another man, we're not going to be fully married, you're not going to be fully married, but then I will be yours. Then you will be mine. Then I will be yours. There's going to be a time after that when it changes. The main reason for saying that is because, one, it completes the story, right? And then two, if you look at what God does with Israel in verses 4 and 5, that's how it is there. They have to wait many days without things, without priest, king, ephod, pillar, sacrifice, teraphim. They have to wait many days, but then they will return to the Lord in the David their king. So this is the end of the story in Hosea Gomer. Okay, so here is another parallel just to help explain it. Okay, so Deuteronomy 21 was about when Israel would go out to battle and they would take spoil, and a man might see a woman that he wants to marry as a part of that battle. So they've had a battle, he sees a woman, okay, whose husband has obviously probably been killed as part of the battle, and this man says, I'd like to take her for my wife. So God says, well, I'm going to give you regulations for how that's going to take place. And what he says is, when you go to battle, I'm going to skip down to the bold, okay, so he's going to bring her as a wife, she's going to bring her home to your house, so she's going to be in the house, she's going to shave her head and trim her nails. Okay, and here's the parallel, or something that may help kind of explain it. She shall also remove the clothes of her captivity, and shall remain in your home. That's the same word. Hey, you're going to remain for many days. You're going to remain in your home. Mourn her father for a full month. So there's going to be this period of time where she's at the home waiting, and something's going on. In this case, it's mourning because she's lost her family. And after that, you may go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. So hopefully you can kind of see the parallels between those two things. Okay, so here's a quick summary, because I know that was very detailed. Here's a quick summary. I'm going to skip the second sentence. In response to Yahweh's command to show love to Gomer, Hosea initiates a relationship by some form of a payment. However, he doesn't immediately consummate the new relationship. Instead, he requires that she wait an undetermined number of days, many days, for him in celibacy. He promises, however, that he will eventually come to her and restore her completely. Okay? Fair enough? Yeah, I'm going to just run through this because all this is now God's going to say, the reason I'm telling you to do all this, Hosea, is because this is what's going to happen between me and Israel. I'm going to love Israel even though she loves idols. I'm going to make a payment for her. What's that payment? Christ. That's Christ dying on the cross, right? I'm going to die for her. I'm going to make it possible for us to have a relationship, but she's going to remain many days without these things. And in the end, in the last days, she'll come back and will be fully restored. Okay, and that's the picture of the new covenant. So this is where I wanted to get to, and this is the last two slides. So I actually don't have my clock. Battery is dead, so I don't know what time it is or how we're doing. But we're gonna get through these two slides, and then we'll we'll do our memory verse and have our break. But this was the whole point of this morning, is this picture of betrothal is, I think, what explains, is a picture, one way to explain how the new covenant has been cut, how it's been initiated, but isn't fully consummated. Okay? So I'm going to just read, this is actually from myjewishlearning.com. So this is Israeli, a Jewish site that talks about, helps Jewish people understand their heritage and their history.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So are you saying that time where she can't be with other men or play the harlot is like, is she can't sacrifice?
That's today. That's right. So maybe I'll go back to the very end, but if you remember, there was that one little graph that was from my thesis that said, hey, when are the many days, when are the last days? And most people say, oh, the many days started in not most, but a lot of people say the many days started in the exile, because that's when they were, the temple was destroyed, they got sent away, they no longer had kings. The problem is that they came back, right? And they had sacrifice, and they had princes, and they had those things. So that's the hard part of that view. Plus, there's a sequence that's going through that says, first there's going to be Jezreel, then there's going to be Assyria in 722, and then there's going to be Assyria being defeated in 701, then there's going to be where you're no longer my people in 586, then there's going to be this purchase paid. So that has to come, and that comes before the many days. So the many days is our current age right now, where they are without all those things. They're without sacrifice, they're without prince, they're without idols, really, even. They're without both legitimate, we'll talk about that second hour, they're without legitimate and illegitimate forms of those things. And then someday, in the last days, whenever that is, they're going to return. So we have many days. He didn't say 2,000 or 1,000 or 3,000. We don't know how many. But for many days, that's going to be the way. And then the last days, they're going to return. So let me read this. Did that answer your question, Tom?
Yeah.
Until late in the Middle Ages, marriage consisted of two ceremonies that were marked by celebrations at two separate times. We kind of see this a little bit. There's remains of this even in our engagement period, right? That we have even, but it was much more formal in these days, with an interval between the two ceremonies. First came the betrothal, and later the wedding. At the betrothal, the woman was legally married. So once they had that, so what God did, or what Hosea did with Gomer, before she waited, they were legally married, as it were. They just weren't fully restored. There was this time in between. Although she still remained in her father's house. She could not belong to another man unless she was divorced from her betrothed. The wedding meant only that the betrothed woman, accompanied by a colorful procession, was brought from her father's house to the house of her groom, and the legal tie with him was consummated. Marriage, as with any type of purchase, here's an example where they thought it was very much a purchase of the woman, unlike the other quote we read, consisted of two acts. First, the price was paid and an agreement reached on the conditions of sale. Sometime later, the purchaser took possession of the object. In marriage, the mohar was paid and the detailed agreement reached between the families of the bride and groom. The betrothal was followed by the wedding, when the bride was brought into the home of the groom, who took actual possession of her.
Do you think this is some of the confusion with universalism? That they think that since they're purchased with the price, that they actually belong to the church, or more not necessarily universalism, but classical dispensationalism, that think all Jews are already saved. And, is that where
I've never heard that. I don't know. I'm not sure. I've not heard that people think all Jews have already been saved. So I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, that's an older dispensationalism that they're usually saying that Israel is different from the church, and they have their own thing going on, and the church has got their own thing going on. The church is saved through Christ, yet the Jews are saved because of the chosen people of God.
So they would. Yeah. So when I read all Israel will be saved, like in Romans, I'm thinking about the future when there's that restoration. But you're saying that some folks actually read that and say, yeah, even the ones today are saved because they're.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've never heard that. That doesn't sound like very good. I don't know how they would argue that.
Good, but I know that they use that.
Okay. They very well. Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't heard that. I think there's always on both sides of that spectrum I mentioned earlier. There's always some really weird. There could be some odd views.
I would also say that doesn't really flow in line with how God has handled Israel, or even when they were in the wilderness, He got rid of a lot of them.
Yeah.
And they weren't saved. but the ones that were the remnant, he kept.
Yeah, one thing to be careful of is Paul, a lot of times in the New Testament, will use that wilderness experience to talk about the church. And one danger that people fall into sometimes is Paul's really using that to talk about whether they made it to the promised land or not. And so many of those Israelites who died in the wilderness were likely saved. You know what I mean? Like, I doubt that Moses, Joshua, and Caleb, that's it. Moses didn't make it to the promised land.
I'm talking about the ones who were idolatrous.
Yes, absolutely. That's right. That's right. But it's still, you can get into wrong views if you don't, like Paul saying, hey, you need to be careful lest you think you stand and you fall. Like, just because you're confessing Christ, and just because you've been baptized, like you then go commit a bunch of idolatry. Did you see what happened to the Israelites in the wilderness? Like, that's his point. But I see what you're saying now. Yeah, so you were exactly right. Like, God, and there's just so many verses I think about, John the Baptist saying, just because you think, God can make children of Abraham out of these stones. Like, don't think just because you're children of Abraham that you're saved. So I think you're right. Yeah, it doesn't match. I hadn't heard that, but I'm not surprised that somebody thinks it. So last slide, very last one. These are just some biblical examples of betrothal that will help shed light on it, and then we're done. But again, this is the main point of this is this idea of betrothal, this idea of a two-part marriage is what I think explains, or is one picture way of explaining what's happened in the new covenant. Yes, Jesus said it was purchased through his blood, and absolutely it was. The price was paid. But on the other hand, he's gone, just like that's what normally happens. There's a separation. They spend time together, but they're not in their house yet. He's gone, he's preparing a place, all that, right? But the consummation has not happened yet. So here's just some examples. In the law, if a man has taken a wife, they've been betrothed, but they have not yet been fully married, they're allowed to not go to battle because you don't want to die and then somebody else takes her. But here is an example where when a man is betrothed and has not married her, right? So it's a two-part process. Obviously, the most well-known example is Joseph and Mary, right? And you can tell how serious it was. He knew that he would have to divorce her. That was the only way to deal with it. They were legally married, even though they had not come together. And he was going to have to divorce her if he wanted to. So he was going to put her away secretly. They were betrothal. I won't read all this, but this is just another case law from the law where a man essentially rapes a woman, and she's in a city, and so in this case they say no, it's not rape because she would have called out, and so we need to stone both of them. The main point of bringing this up is just because he violated his neighbor's wife, but she's just betrothed. If there's a betrothed virgin and a man meets her, so she's already referred to as their wife, and so. Despite the fact that they're not fully consummated yet, that's what betrothal meant in those days. And then the last is just Jacob and Rachel. So Jacob was betrothed to Rachel, but had to work 7 years. He had a long betrothal period. Usually it's about a year or two, just like us here with our engagement periods, usually close to a year, a little under a year. Theirs was usually a year or two. Jacob had 7 years in his case, working for Rachel. And if you remember, they seemed like not very long to him because of his love for her. And then you'll remember the story of Dinah when Jacob and his 12 sons are coming in, and Shechem wants Dinah, and he violates her, and he says, hey, we don't ask any price, but we just want you all to be circumcised. It was a deceitful. But you can begin to see this idea of betrothal was very part and parcel of the Israelite view of marriage. And so covenant, we speak of marriages like a covenant, and the new covenant is very much like that, where God has gone back, just like Hosea, to love Israel, despite the fact that she doesn't love him. And he has paid a price, he's initiated that covenant. In a real sense, they're married. He's bought them, but in another sense, it's not fully consummated yet. So that's kind of the point of all this. We're going to pray, we'll do our memory verse, we'll break, and then we'll talk about Hosea 3 again in a totally different way. In the second hour. Any questions?
So you're basically saying at the end that when that whole it's paid for but hasn't been consummated is when all of Israel Revelation for,
Yeah, so we'll talk next hour about, like, what's the purpose of the betrothal period? Like, why? Well, the normal purpose was often to get to know each other. Didn't always, it was often chosen for them, but to make preparations for the wedding and for bringing this new gal into their home, starting a family, changing relationships that are going to, so all those things. But in Hosea, in God's case, there seemed to be a little bit of a disciplinary kind of purpose, right? You see the other purpose in Deuteronomy when you take the lady from spoils of war, as it were. There was a period of mourning allowed there. So the purpose of the betrothal period could be different. In the case of Hosea and Gomer and God of Israel, it seems to be to bring them to repentance because they're so harlotry. It's just, and we saw that in the verse we skipped over in Hosea 3:5. They'll come trembling to God and His goodness in the last days. All right, so let's pray, and then we'll do our memory verse, and we'll have a break. Lord, thank you for your word, and thank you for these people and us being able to get together and try to learn together and understand you. Thank you for leaving your word so that we can know more about you, we can understand what you're doing, and we can trust you. Help us to seek you with all our heart. Help us to love you and not turn to others, to other idols or gods or pleasures, but to love you with all of our heart and to focus on you. Give us wisdom as we do that and courage to do that. In Jesus' name.